Hey, welcome into DomTime. Talking about so-called stand your ground laws, because each state differs, and there are a majority of states that have a version of Florida's stand your ground law. One of the big issues with this, with our two guests, Shira Goodman from Ceasefire, Pennsylvania, Jonathan Goldstein, who is a firearms attorney out of Montgomery County. Jonathan, one of the big issues was, I was surprised when all this Trayvon Martin aftermath happened, that the Tampa Tribune has a website towards stand your ground and how it's been used in Florida. And their argument, and they're pretty neutral, was that blacks were using this, African Americans, disproportionately to their numbers in Florida. And this takes away some of the idea that this is racially divisive, that that's what we're seeing here, that the Trayvon Martin case is the template for what happens with stand your ground.
Yeah, I mean, you've got it exactly right. So there's a scholar named David Hardy who I would recommend to anyone who's interested in these issues. He's pro-gun, but he does a fairly good job on this, reveals his data, and is fairly balanced. He took a look at this data from the Tampa Bay Times article, and in short, he says, looking at it another way, African Americans make up 16% of Florida's population, but 26% of persons exonerated under Florida's no retreat and self-defense statutes. So he has looked at it, and it is not this sort of racially skewed thing. If anything, African Americans are using it more often to be exonerated, and that's a very curious phenomenon.
Sure, do you see this as racially, I mean, this is the Al Sharpton, it's the Eric Holder in my viewpoint. That's the real elephant in the room here, not just self-protection. Right. In some, you two guys are brilliant and debate each other, but this is something that is more commonplace every day. That's what people are taking away from all this.
Well, I think that, you know, I have to look at the statistics, but I think people would say, what if it's not just the race of the defendant, but the race of the victim? You know, what's also the proportion of the homicide cases involving those people? So is it, you know, how do those statistics work? But I think people really felt in this case that, I think some people felt that Trayvon Martin was the person who had his right to stand his ground in that scenario, and that things, you know, we'll never know exactly what happened.
He did have a right to stand his ground, but if, as the jury believed, I mean, I think that's why they came to the decision.
Right, at some point they got to the point where
if he attacked Zimmerman, when Zimmerman was stalking or following or doing whatever he was doing, Zimmerman, do you support that? Would ceasefire support in this situation that you do have a right to use deadly force if you reasonably think your life is being threatened or serious bodily injury?
We believe that people should still have the duty to retreat. We have a lot of questions about, you know, should he have gotten out of that car? You know, did he create the situation? The Pennsylvania law does talk about if you've created a situation, if you provoked the attack.
Do you see this as potentially that he provoked it just by what we know? Not
Again, and we'll never know because one person can't tell us and one person invoked his right.
You're afraid
not
that that's a takeaway from this, that guys are going to be emboldened.
Right, so they'll say, I have a gun, I can get out of the car, I have a right to be here, I can do this. I don't want people thinking that. If people have a license to carry, and they have legitimately gotten them, and Pennsylvania's laws are stricter than Florida's. I don't think that should still embolden them to take risks they wouldn't otherwise take.
You see it that way,
we're not seeing people emboldened in Pennsylvania. We've had this law for 2 years, and we haven't had a case like this. Moreover, an important point we didn't get to in the last segment, the Stand Your Ground law in Pennsylvania also provides important civil protections for people who use these self-defense techniques. For example, it used to be the case that you could be acquitted of murder, right? You would use self-defense and you'd be acquitted of murder, and you'd immediately face a civil suit.
Which Zimmerman is facing.
Correct. And the burden of proof on a civil suit, as you all know, is preponderance, 51%, more likely than not. So you can beat the criminal case where they have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt a much higher standard and still find yourself bankrupted in a civil suit. Pennsylvania's law, quite importantly, offers protection from those civil suits.
Ceasefire okay with that?
Again, we just think these laws embolden people to take risks. Oh, it might not be so bad for me to pull out my gun in this situation.
See, I think we have a difference in how I see the average holder of a weapon like Zimmerman, particularly if it's a concealed carry permit. I see them as responsible, not wanting to do this. Maybe ceasefire sees these guys as just ready to jump in if the law's on their side.
I hope that people who get those concealed carry permits here are responsible citizens who want who don't want to have to pull their weapons, who are trying to protect themselves or their family, and that's why they carry, and that's why their sheriff or police department.
But what do you think the evidence is? What's your gut instinct? What do you think they're about?
I don't know. I mean, I think some of those people might be
Right.
I don't know that George Zimmerman was like that, and I also don't know that George Zimmerman would have gotten a Pennsylvania license to carry.
To speculate about George
Why?
Zimmerman is well, to speculate.
Why wouldn't he have gotten a Pennsylvania
There's
license?
things in his history that a sheriff or police, police chief.
Do you remember any specifics?
Sure. I mean, first of all, he might have failed the character test. How many times was he calling 911 all the time to report things? They might have known things about him. I think he had a protection from abuse order. I don't think he was convicted of anything. I think there were some misdemeanors, though. Those are things that in Pennsylvania could be used to do that, and I'm not sure he would have gotten that license to carry here.
So the people who I train, and I train a lot of people who have carry licenses. I offer courses in the law of self-defense all over the state all the time, which, by the way, I wish Ceasefire would do. I wish if they cared so much about gun safety, they would offer some safety training like we do at the NRA. Nevertheless, I can say that the people that I train are very responsible people, and I don't think if, God forbid,
Give me the profile. If I had to strip all this down, tell me the type of person that you're training. What are they like?
I'll tell you this, they're law-abiding, they're focused on their own safety and
A lot
the
of
safety
women
of their
now?
family. Yeah, we have a fair number of women that are coming through the course. In fact, I advise that if a man is passionate enough about firearms to get one of these licenses, if there's a woman or another adult in that household, I suggest that they also get a carry license because they're, the way the laws work, that's beneficial for everyone. But what I can tell you is that these people, if God forbid they ever have to use a gun to defend themselves, ought not to then face the second insult. Having been forced into a situation where they had to defend their life, they ought not to have to bet their entire net worth on a civil suit that's going to come from the person that they had to defend their life against.
Okay, coming up more with Shira Goodman and Jonathan Goldstein. And where is it more difficult? Where is it better to be? I'm going to ask Shira if she can put on her crystal ball for a second. In New Jersey, where it's much stricter, I think, than in Pennsylvania, which is the better outcome for everybody? Straight ahead on DomTime.